America didn't become powerful overnight. It was shaped by broken dreams, desperate risks, silent sacrifices, and moments when the world was burning. This isn't just a story of a nation, it's a story of people, choices, and consequences that quietly changed the direction of history. The night air was heavy with salt and uncertainty as the old wooden ship cut through the Atlantic. Elias Carter stood at the railing, fingers numb, staring into the darkness where the ocean met the sky. He had left behind a life he could barely remember anymore. Muddy streets, hunger that never slept, and a future already decided for him by birth. Somewhere ahead was land people whispered about as if it were a myth. A place where names didn't matter as much as effort. A place that didn't yet know what it would become. When the shoreline finally appeared at dawn, Elias felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Fear, yes, but also possibility. Around him, others cried quietly or whispered prayers. No one knew it then, but these fragile moments of arrival, repeated millions of times over generations, were the first invisible bricks of a future superpower. The early days were not heroic. They were raw and exhausting. Settlements were messy, arguments constant, trust fragile. Elias worked until his hands cracked, trading labor for shelter, then for land. At night, by candlelight, he listened as people argued about freedom, what it meant, who deserved it, and how much blood it might cost. Freedom sounded beautiful, but it was loud, uncomfortable, and frightening. Years later, Elias watched his son Nathan argue with neighbors under an open sky about rules and representation. If power sits too far away, Nathan said, voice shaking but strong, it stops listening. Those conversations turned into movements, and movements turned into defiance. When the first shots echoed across fields and towns, the idea of America was no longer just hope. It was a risk people were willing to die for. War carved scars into the land and the people. Hunger returned. So did grief. Elias buried friends and watched boys become men too fast. But something else grew alongside the pain, a shared identity. 13 fragile colonies began to see themselves as one voice, imperfect but determined. When independence finally came, it wasn't clean or glorious. It was exhausted, uncertain, and deeply human. The new nation stumbled. It argued with itself relentlessly. North against South. Farmer against merchant. Ideal against reality. Flags changed, stars were added one by one, not as decoration, but as proof that the idea was expanding, stretching to include more land, more people, more contradictions. Each star carried conflict behind it, and each stripe remembered blood. Generations passed. The country grew restless, ambitious. Factories replaced fields. Smoke replaced silence. Samuel Carter, Elias's great-grandson, stood on a factory floor watching machines roar to life. The work was brutal, but the output was endless. Steel, engines, weapons, America learned how to produce at a scale the world had never seen. When distant wars erupted, oceans away, the country supplied while others burned. World wars reshaped everything. While cities overseas collapsed into rubble, America's factories ran day and night. Samuel noticed the shift before newspapers did. Money flowed. Technology accelerated. Women took roles once forbidden. The nation didn't escape loss, but it emerged stronger, wealthier, and more confident than before. Power, once imagined, became measurable. Then came the quiet war, the one without constant gunfire. Samuel's daughter, Evelyn Carter, grew up practicing drills in school, hiding under desks from threats that never came. She learned early that fear could be invisible and constant. The rivalry with the distant Red enemy pushed America to innovate faster, reach higher, think bigger. Space became the new battlefield. Knowledge became ammunition. Evelyn worked at a research lab filled with people from everywhere, accents layered over one another, ideas colliding. Scientists, thinkers, dreamers arrived not because America was perfect, but because it allowed them to try. Failures weren't endings, they were steps. That culture, messy and competitive, quietly pulled talent from across the globe. But beneath the pride, Evelyn saw cracks. Poverty beside wealth. Promises beside disappointment. Power didn't erase problems, it magnified them. When the rival empire finally collapsed under its own weight, celebrations felt hollow to those who understood the cost. Winning didn't mean healing. America stood alone at the top, but the view was complicated. It was built by immigrants and outsiders, by conflict and compromise, by ambition that never fully slept. The Carter family had lived through its birth, its rise, and its contradictions. And as Evelyn watched a new generation question the future, she understood the truth. America became the #1 superpower not because it was flawless, but because it never stopped changing, arguing, and chasing something just beyond reach. Morning light poured through the diner window as Marcus Hill stirred his coffee, eyes fixed on the flickering television above the counter. News anchors spoke confidently about markets, military budgets, and global influence. Numbers rolled across the screen like they were destiny itself. Marcus had heard these claims his whole life, that America was the center of everything. But growing up, power didn't feel global. It felt personal. It felt like whether the lights stayed on, whether his mother could rest, whether tomorrow would be kinder than today. His grandfather, Samuel Carter, used to tell him stories passed down like fragile heirlooms, about ships and factories and wars that changed the world. Marcus listened more closely as he got older, realizing those stories weren't about glory. They were about timing. America had been in the right place at the right moments, and it had taken risks others couldn't afford. Marcus worked as a history teacher, and every year his students asked the same question: why America? He never answered it the same way twice. Sometimes he talked about geography, oceans acting like shields. Other times about resources, innovation, or immigration. But privately, he believed the real answer lived in contradiction. During the Great Wars, while Europe and parts of Asia bled, America produced. It sold supplies, weapons, food. It loaned money and built alliances. By the time the smoke cleared, the country held the world's debt and its trust. That power wasn't taken by force alone. It was inherited through stability. The Cold War shaped everything that followed. Marcus remembered his grandmother Evelyn describing the tension, how silence could feel louder than bombs. Schools taught children to fear a red button. Scientists raced not just to discover, but to outdo. The competition created satellites, computers, and eventually the digital foundations Marcus now depended on daily. When the rival empire fell, Marcus was still a child. He remembered adults cheering, flags waving. But no one explained what came next. Being the only superpower meant responsibility without balance. Every decision echoed louder. Every mistake spread faster. In college, Marcus met people from all over the world. Many had chosen America deliberately. Not because it was easy, but because it allowed reinvention. A failed idea didn't define you forever. That openness, sometimes reckless, was magnetic. It drew entrepreneurs, scientists, artists. It turned ideas into industries. Yet, Marcus couldn't ignore the ground reality. He saw wealth stacked like towers next to neighborhoods forgotten by policy. He saw freedom celebrated while voices went unheard. Power didn't erase inequality. It often hid it. One evening, after class, a student asked him quietly, "Do you think America will always be on top?" Marcus paused longer than usual. He thought of Elias on the ship, Samuel in the factory, Evelyn in the lab. None of them knew the future they were building. "No," Marcus finally said. "And that's okay. Power isn't permanent. What matters is what you do while you have it." That night, Marcus walked home under a sky crowded with planes, satellites blinking faintly above. America's strength wasn't just military or economic. It was narrative, the story it told about itself, and the stories people believed enough to join. Superpower status came from survival, timing, and relentless motion. It came from profiting during chaos, learning during conflict, and attracting minds when others pushed them away. But it also came with responsibility, one the nation was still learning to carry. Marcus opened his grandfather's old notebook and added a final line beneath decades of family history: "Power is borrowed from the future." Whether America would return it wisely remained unanswered. The classroom was quiet as Marcus Hill erased the board, chalk dust drifting like fading memories. Outside, the world argued endlessly about America, its influence, its failures, its future. Inside, Marcus felt the weight of unfinished stories. History wasn't done. It never was. He often thought about how myths were formed. America didn't rise through a single moment, but through accumulation. Small advantages stacked patiently. Oceans protected it. Diversity fed it. Conflict sharpened it. Even mistakes, repeated and painful, forced adaptation. His students represented that evolution. Children of immigrants sat beside families who had been there for centuries. Some dreamed of leaving, others dreamed of leading. The country remained a contradiction, simultaneously confident and insecure, admired and criticized. Marcus remembered his grandmother Evelyn's final words before she passed. "Don't confuse dominance with destiny." At the time, he didn't fully understand. Now, watching the world shift, new powers rising, technology leveling old advantages, he did. America's Olympic medals, Nobel Prizes, global companies, these were outcomes, not causes. The cause was an ecosystem that rewarded risk more than tradition. That welcomed disruption even when it hurt. That allowed voices to argue loudly without fully breaking the system. But ecosystems could decay. Marcus saw warning signs: polarization, distraction, forgetting history's lessons. Superpower status could fade not through invasion, but complacency. One afternoon, he invited his class to debate the future. Not whether America was powerful, but whether it would remain relevant. The room filled with energy. Disagreement sparked curiosity. It reminded Marcus of those early debates Elias once stood in, messy, loud, alive. As the bell rang, Marcus felt a quiet optimism. Not blind hope, but earned belief. America had never been perfect, but perfection was never the source of its strength. Adaptation was. Walking home, he looked up at the flag waving gently against the sky. 50 stars, each one a reminder of expansion, conflict, compromise. The flag didn't represent victory. It represented process. America became the #1 superpower through a series of human decisions. Some brave, some selfish, some accidental. Its future would be shaped the same way. The story wasn't over. It was simply waiting for the next chapter to be written.